All right, so back out at Rockaway and Pacifica, and I'm here with Tad, and today we're gonna experiment with applying thick paint. So we squeezed out a lot of paint, and we're gonna get started. All right, so I got my usual setup here, usual colors, and I'm gonna be painting over an old 16 by 20 inch panel. I'm gonna be using liquid as my medium, and probably mostly using this number 10 Rosemary Ivory brush. It's a synthetic flat. All right, Tad, you're painting on, what is 12 by 16?
12 by 16.
All right, and then I noticed that you rose to the occasion here and squeezed out a lot of paint.
A lot of paint.
Love that.
Yeah.
So, do you know what you're gonna paint?
I'm kind of drawn to this scene over here with that kind of island thing in the background.
All right, so that backlit scene?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
And maybe make it more of like a tonal kind of a thing.
Yeah, there's something nice, you know, having a backlit scene like that really simplifies the shapes. All right, and I'm gonna paint in this direction here. Gonna make something of these rocks and waves. All right, mixing up a dark using ultramarine, burnt sienna, and a bit of alizarin crimson. The goal here is not necessarily to do a good painting. The painting can be bad, but the paint has got to be thick. Do you hear that, Tad? I say painting can be bad, but the paint has to be thick.
Okay, all right.
All right, added some burnt sienna to the mix so I can make these darker shapes. I'm kind of making the rocks fairly large because I really do like the color on the rocks and how they relate to the water. All right, so for the white water in the foreground, I'm using titanium white and ultramarine with a bit of burnt sienna. The first goal here is just to get rid of the old painting underneath as quickly as possible. Painting over an old painting is challenging, but it does force you to look at big shapes, you know, because if you sketch out a drawing over an old painting, you can't even see it. So I typically will just mass in big shapes like rock here, rock here, rock here, mountains in the distance, sky, and then the water in the foreground. So this is just a thin mixture that you know, has quite a bit of liquid in it. But there you can already start to see what the composition looks like. For the sky, I'm using a mixture of titanium white and ultramarine blue with a bit of phthalo blue in here as well. I'm gonna kind of leave these distant mountains, but the shape is kind of different than what was in the previous painting. All right, for the distant mountains, adding a bit of ultramarine and some alizarin crimson. And I painted this scene a few days ago on a much smaller panel, and one of the problems was being able to paint these little shapes in the distance because they were so small. And I was trying to paint thick, and using a small brush, very difficult to paint thick because you can barely get any paint on a small brush. All right, now I'm gonna start reinforcing the darks. I just kind of want to show you guys how much paint is on the brush. And you know, I am gonna try to keep the darks somewhat thinner than the lights, gonna really load the lights, but I do want to make sure I have plenty of paint on my brush. I want to try to do this painting in less than an hour. And even though it's a 16 by 20, I don't feel like it's going to take me, I don't feel like it's going to take me that much longer than painting a smaller panel. I kind of want to have this rock go out a little bit more this way. I don't know, maybe that's too much. Actually, yeah, I don't like that. You know, I want more of a path out into the distance. All right, so for the distant water, I'm using titanium white, phthalo blue, cadmium yellow medium, and some burnt sienna. And these colors, you know, will be adjusted when I go over them. I need to decide on my whitewater pattern here next, I think. So for the whitewater, I'm starting with a mix of titanium white and dioxazine purple. And I'm thinking in terms of shapes. So I've got a big shape right here. I know that I want whitewater out here, but what do I want that shape to be? You know, I do want the waves to kind of come in like in a radial fashion. All right, so I like that shape right there. Maybe it can kind of connect to another shape down here. All right, actually I want this to come higher like that. I'll erase that. So again, so I'm having like radial waves. That might be a bit too extreme. Maybe if it came up more like that. All right, I mixed in a little bit of titanium white into my dark mixture. Experiment with putting some dark sand down in this corner. And this idea may not work out, just experimenting. I can always wipe it off. So I'm mixing into my distant watercolor with some burnt sienna and cadmium yellow medium to warm it up. And then I'm just gonna experiment with putting some of that color, you know, around the white water. At this point, just playing around with big shapes and still keeping the paint fairly thin until I have, you know, a compositional idea that I'm happy with. All right, so you've kind of obliterated the old image and you've got some shapes on there. Yeah. So you're keeping it kind of thin at this point too, huh?
Yep, yeah, I'm just starting to go into some thicker paint now.
I know, this is like the moment of truth.
Yeah.
All right, so for the light portion of the hills, I've got titanium white and burnt sienna and some dioxazine purple. And I may leave some of the previous painting showing through. I'm not sure. We'll see how that goes. Like, you know, there's little bits here and there in the water, and so if they look good, you know, I'll leave them. I try to eliminate, you know, the areas that are too dark just because they're, you know, they stand out too much. And I'm mostly just focusing on values at this point. I'm not as concerned with, you know, with color. I can fix the color, but I just want to have a value structure that that works. All right, there's some white water around the rocks that's kind of more of a blue color using titanium white and ultramarine here. And I know you guys are probably like, hey, look, we came for the thick paint. What's going on? Composition is king. So I want to make sure that my basic shapes are interesting. All right, let's scoop out a lot. Okay, so there's a big chunk of blue. Kind of get into this mixture here. And some titanium white. And I don't want to play it safe. Okay. All right, I don't know if you can see the brush, pretty loaded. There's kind of this blue, green color in the rocks, mostly in here. So I'm gonna scoop up quite a bit of yellow ochre and mix it in here. Okay, that's turning too green, so I'll add a bit of alizarin crimson and no medium. Little pops of saturation out here. Now mixing some titanium white in there. Again, no medium. And there's bits of light at the top of the rocks.
Oh, that's beautiful, man.
Oh, thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you. Something like that. So if you're up close to this, it looks pretty chaotic, but you know, you back up and it still holds together. All right, reinforcing the light on the top of the rocks, and it kind of goes down the front. And the feel I'm looking for with the brush is that the paint kind of, or the brush just kind of floats over the paint underneath. There's like no resistance. And you kind of have to have a light touch to allow, you know, the paint to sit over the other paint. And you got to reload the brush frequently. There's some white areas to the rock over here, but I don't want to go too bright because I don't want to draw the eye over there. I want to keep the eye in this area here. I'm not even going to clean my brush. I'm going to just dip into the dark. It's kind of a soft edge right there. Almost like a little bit of directional action going like that. And then also out here. I'm really liking the way this brush behaves. It's soft enough that, you know, it picks up a lot of paint. I want to keep the white water in this area a little darker in value, as I mentioned before, because I don't want to draw the eye too much to the edge. And the paint underneath is getting tacky already. I'm losing some of the ability to create like kind of a fluid stroke. It means I need to put more paint on the brush. All right, I want to be sure to scoop up quite a bit of paint. So ultramarine and titanium white. I like the idea of kind of having a wave rise up right there. You know, I try not to make the bottom of the rocks too perfect. I want them to be irregular and kind of messed up. It's kind of more like how, you know, the water behaves around these rocks because the shapes are so irregular. All right, how you doing there, Tad? Are you having any challenges like putting thick paint on?
I tend to want to dig in, which
Yeah.
I think like a lighter touch is good with a thicker paint.
Yeah, having it glide over for sure. All right, getting some random interesting things going on here that I want to keep. I do feel like I want a little bit more darkness here, maybe under this wave, and a little bit of ultramarine maybe under here to kind of define some of these shapes. Loaded. I don't want this line to be too orderly.
Yeah.
Okay. And it turns out I am getting areas of thick and thin, which is cool, you know. It doesn't all have to be completely frosted like a cake. Just little bits of, actually the contrast of thick against thin is kind of nice. All right, gonna put in a few sky reflections using titanium white and ultramarine blue. Maybe start out here. And with sky reflections, the key is to get the value right. All right, fine tuning the sky, ultramarine and titanium white. And it's definitely harder to apply the paint without medium, but it does go on much thicker. Start mixing in a little cobalt teal to the mixture. That may be a bit too blue-green, but we'll see. All right, and at the horizon, I'm going with titanium white and yellow ochre and kind of mixing with the paint that's already on the panel. I like those bits of sky reflection out there.
Oh, thanks.
I was just talking about that earlier, how, you know, it's like you got to get the value just right. It's got to be just slightly lighter than the water below.
Yeah.
So that reads really well. All right, so I'm mixing up a warm white here using titanium white and cadmium yellow lemon. I don't know if you can see this, but having those bits of yellow against the blue kind of creates a light effect. But I also want to make sure that I'm not drawing too much attention down here. So just a few little bits of light, maybe in this area. But I want to have more up in this area here to draw the eye in this direction. And I am mixing a little bit of liquid with this color here and trying to keep it pretty fast, loose, spontaneous. All right, so here is what I finished up with. One of the first things I noticed was that thicker paint means more color. It's easier to get saturated colors when you're painting with thicker paint. There's also more texture, which I think is really nice when painting a seascape, or rocks for that matter. You know, it's easier to get some interesting texture in the rocks and the water. As far as composition goes, I'm happy with the composition. I wanted to include the dark sand, which is a feature of Rockaway Beach. I love the way this dark sand reflects the sky, sort of a dark purple or dark ultramarine color, which complements the orange in the cliffs and the rocks nicely. I try to make my waves as irregular as possible, and then also the shoreline as irregular as possible. You know, not having the waves come in perfectly parallel lines. I do feel like I got a nice bit of variety in the wave patterns. It is a challenge to paint thicker. I think a lot of us are pretty conservative with the amount of paint we use. I had to keep encouraging myself to dig deeper into the piles of paint and use more and mix bigger piles. I'm sure you guys can relate to this, but I think one of the biggest challenges as a painter is that we tend to fall back into our old habits or back into our comfort zone. So we may go out and do an exercise where we push ourselves, but unless we do it repeatedly, we're just going to fall back into, you know, the same old habits. So So I'm committed to going out and doing this like 3 or 4 more times until it becomes part of my regular practice. I've talked about this before too. I feel like almost all of my paintings now are studies, or no, they're not studies, because I do feel like they finish up in a way that I'd be happy showing them. But my mental approach is that I go into each painting as if it's a study. And, you know, so in other words, without expectation, I'm just trying to explore, you know, different idea, like compositional idea or paint application or something like that. And what I found is that the paintings turn out much better. But in this case, I want to have that clear idea for the next 4 or 5 paintings that, all right, I'm going out and I'm going to paint thicker. I'm going to paint thicker. I hope you guys enjoy this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'll put a link to Tad's Instagram down below, so check that out. There's also a link to Patreon, and the Patreon support is what helps keep me making these videos, and it's much appreciated. Got a bunch of extra videos on there, so check it out. Other than that, stay creative, and I'll see you guys in the next video.